Hello and welcome to our Spring 2025 presentation of the Medical History Interest Group Lecture Series. The Medical History Interest Group presentations are sponsored as part of the Ruth and John Moskop Lecture Series in the Lapis Library History Collections. If you have not already done so, please sign the attendance sheet and help yourselves to refreshments. While you are here, please have a look at our current exhibits. Aesthetics of Anatomy and Art Display and Plague of Piracy on the second floor, Scientists and Their Microscopes on the fourth floor, and the Country Doctor Museum Medical Education exhibit in the History Collections Reading Room. I will now pass it over to Dr. David Denard to introduce our speaker.
You should introduce yourself.
My name is Molly Frazier. I'm the archivist for History Collections at Lapis Library.
This, okay. Testing, can you hear me? Okay. Well, I have a major task here, and I'll try to be brief. I told the speaker, the presenter, I didn't want my introduction to be longer than his presentation, okay? But I want to do justice to him. So I'll start this way. Dr. Todd Savitt is a historian who has written extensively on African American medical history, including topics such as slave health, black medical schools, sickle cell disease, and black physicians. He has taught at the University of Florida, and for the past 42 years at the Brody School of Medicine, where he also served as Assistant Dean of Diversity for 4 years. He has also chaired the History of Medicine Grants Panel for the National Library of Medicine of the National Institutes of Health, and served as Secretary-Treasurer of the American Association for the History of Medicine. Today, you are very fortunate to see and hear one of this nation's few scholars who has earned the reputation as a cutting-edge authority on African American medical history. His research spans the entire period from slavery to freedom, and his expertise has been apparent in both the academy and the public arena. He played a pivotal role in the reconstruction of a 2-story hospital at Somerset Plantation, located in Washington County, North Carolina, the only such facility in this nation that tells the story of medicine among slaves, masters, whites on a southern plantation. And most recently, he provided professional assistance in helping the Phoenix Historical Society obtain statewide recognition for Dr. Milton D. Quigley Sr., a pioneer African-American physician who practiced medicine in Tarboro, North Carolina for roughly 60 years. I have known Dr. Savitt for nearly 40 years and worked with him on several projects during my 34-year tenure in the history department at ECU. And he has also been my neighbor for 39 years. Thus, I am both happy and delighted to present to you today a scholar, former colleague, and current neighbor who is indeed the real deal. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Todd Savitt.
Thank you, man. I don't think I've ever had an introduction like that. Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Denard. That was wonderful. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate having an audience, and I guess we have some folks tuning in on virtually as well. So hello to you all as well. I need to hold this, right?
No.
I don't.
You're good. You don't have to.
Okay. Very good. So I'm going to speak, as you see from the title, about physicians entering medical practice in what we now call the New South, the late 19th, early 20th centuries. I'm going to start with, actually, I'll start with this, just to get this out of the way. If you are interested in what I'm talking about now and want to read more about Black medical history, I have a book, not a bridge, to sell you. I have a book that is a collection of my medical history writings on Black medical history, Race and Medicine in 19th and early 20th century America. You can get it on Amazon if you want. And we have a copy or two here in the library as well. This talk is based on an article I wrote a number of years ago, and that article is in this book. So you can read more detail about what I'm going to talk about. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a couple of quotes. The first one comes from a medical journal called The Medical World, published in Philadelphia around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. This issue is from February of 1914. And it is a letter to the editor, who is Dr. C.F. Taylor. And he makes a point in introducing that letter in the journal by saying that he reproduced it exactly as he received it. So you'll notice some misspellings and stuff. Dear Sir, what is the Negro physician doing as a whole throughout the country as a physician and surgeon? What are they doing financially? How do they compare with the white applicants in state examinations throughout the country? I notice in some places they seems to be making more money than the white physicians. What is the best thing we can do to keep them down? Please let me hear from you in the next number of the World. And I didn't stop each time there was a misspelling or a grammatical error there. So though I'm sure the letter is real, the editor is kind of making fun of this person who wrote the letter. So that's one attitude about Black physicians in the late 19th century and early 20th century. A different attitude is reflected in this late 1890s letter to the well-known Black sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois, written by a young Kentucky physician. And he writes, I am located in a town of 12,000 inhabitants, 1/3 of whom are colored, and am thoroughly convinced that there is a great field here in the South for the educated colored man. As a physician, I am well received by my white professional brother. We ride in the same buggy, consult together, and read each other's books. I have a few white patients, but most of them are colored. I have purchased property on one of our best residence streets and also a business house on the main street of our town. So I'll put up a picture. This is a picture of, as it says, Atlanta physicians and dentists in 1908, just to have a picture of black health professionals at that time period. Both of those letters that I just read to you reflect one thing in common. Black physicians were achieving success in their profession and gaining recognition for it. But as the letters also indicate, black physicians found another matter that affected their professional status, and that was the matter of race. Medicine had been a white, in quotes, profession until now. That is, it was a profession populated predominantly, a huge majority of whites. It's not that it was meant to be a white profession, so I put the quotes around white to make it clear that it's not a white profession reserved for whites. Medicine had also been pretty much a male profession at that time, and that's another whole story that we could talk about some other time. Race was an issue as black physicians dealt with four groups: black patients, white physicians, and other black physicians. And what I'm going to do in this talk is talk about how black physicians dealt with people in these four groups. I hope to show you that black physicians in general adapted to medical practice in this New South period, in this geographical area and time, despite all sorts of racial problems and barriers that had been erected to, as that letter says, keep black physicians down. So I'll start with becoming a physician. Most black physicians before 1920 attended a black medical school in the South. There were two types of schools, missionary and proprietary. I'll say more about that in a second. There were some schools in the North that accepted African American students, but very few and only occasionally, not on any regular basis. After the Civil War, when at first white, predominantly white, missionary groups came from the North to provide education and other services to emancipated African Americans, some of the institutions that were founded, now known as historically black colleges and universities, included the establishment of a medical school. So there are a handful of black medical schools, two of which still exist: Howard in Washington, D.C., and Meharry Medical School in Nashville, Tennessee, from that period back then. And then there were at least 12 other schools that were established, including one here in North Carolina, Leonard Medical School over at Shaw University. The building still stands. I'll show you a picture in a minute. It's now the Divinity School. After these missionary medical schools were established, several that were established, some of the graduates established their own medical schools, and I call them proprietary. That was a term that was used back at that time period, proprietary medical schools, privately owned medical schools. Medical education was not well regulated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and so it was much easier to start a medical school So there were lots of schools, white and a few black-run schools. And so the map I have up here shows, as you can see, Tennessee had very lax laws. A number of schools were founded for African Americans. This is, again, another whole story. I write about most of those schools in that book I held up before. So imagine yourself thinking about applying to medical school. You're African American, it's post-Civil War period, and you have the freedom, the opportunity to become a physician. And you read in the catalog of any of these schools how important it is for you to do that, to go to medical school and become a physician and take care of your people. And the catalogs were very explicit about that good deed that you could be doing. So this is a picture of the Leonard Medical Building in Raleigh. It still stands, as I said, and is, I believe, still the divinity school of Shaw University. So pre-admission, you get pumped up, you get swelled, you know, oh, I'm going to be a physician, I'm going to do good. Then when you start medical school, I'm going to put up several pictures of Leonard. I like Leonard. Several pictures of Leonard graduates as I'm talking here. So on opening day of medical school, you'd get those speeches saying the same thing that you'd read about in the catalog and praising you and telling you that you're doing good and you're going to be model citizens for African Americans in this new era. So opening day speeches pump you up. And then on graduation day, the same thing. You get these speakers coming, white and black, from the local town, talking about how good you are and how important you are, etc. And you're even recruited by towns to come to their town and be a doctor in that town. So black citizens in certain cities would vie for the graduates of schools like Leonard to come to their town. One of the reasons I like Leonard so much is because there were records. A lot of these schools don't have records, and for a historian it was great. So I know what I'm saying because I was able to read letters from students, from graduates and students, back to the professors at the school at Leonard. So black physicians, once they graduated, were highly regarded and respected and gained instant status in the community. But once they left med school and set off on their own, black physicians, like any other newly minted physician, wondered, am I competent enough? Did I learn enough in medical school? Still the same things today. Am I good enough? Can I do this? And can I earn a living at this? Can I get patients to come and pay me to take care of them? Can I support myself? But the difference was these were citizens just 1 or 2 generations away from enslavement. It's a different world back then. So this was a big deal. And because in slavery times, of course, education was not permitted. So this was a big thing. In addition, there was a lot riding on success. I don't know a number, but a lot of students came to medical school with the support of their families and even their towns. Their neighbors would provide extra funds because you still had to pay to go to medical school. So students were poor or not wealthy, and sometimes in debt. Letters to the two deans that were the deans of Leonard Medical School talk about getting summer jobs, and one of the duties of the deans of that medical school was to find employment for the students during the summer so that they could afford to come back. Again, there's some of those letters I reproduce in this volume. So a lot was riding on the success of these new physicians as they entered what had been a white medical profession. So, what kind of response did they get when they arrived? Again, imagine yourself when you arrive in a town, you've got your books, and you've got some instruments, and you rent a room or an office or both, and you hang out your shingle. And then what? What happens? So the first dean and president, actually, the president of Shaw University and the dean of the medical school, though he wasn't a physician, was this man, Charles Meserve. And there were a bunch of letters that I was able to find in the records there. So one of the graduates of Leonard wrote back to Dr. Meserve, "I am now in Hampton, Virginia, my future home. I like Hampton very much and consider the outlook very fair, but of course it will take time and patience." And I love you can spell patience two ways, right? And both of them apply. It will take time and patience. So I don't know if this guy realized he was playing with words here, but it's all right. And then he finishes the letter by saying, "I can do both," that is, time and patience, "if I just don't get too hungry." So kind of a nice way of saying, and a very clear way of saying, it's a little scary when you start out. So what do you do when you arrive in a strange place? You're a person of color, African American. What do you do? One thing you could do is go to church on Sunday, right? Especially in the black church, it can be a very welcoming place. So this man, J. Edward Perry, was a Meharry graduate, 1893, I believe. He wrote a book called 40 Cords of Wood, a memoir. It's not very, I don't know. It's okay. I mean, it's got a lot of information in it. Literary, it's not. It's got some, it uses the passive tense for one thing, as you'll see. Anyway, Dr. Perry, it was a great source of information for me, the book. He moved to the town of Mexico, Missouri, right after graduating in 1893. And that first Sunday, he decided that there were two black churches in Mexico, Missouri. So he went to one of them, and he wrote about it in his book, 40 Cords of Wood. So he says, "At the conclusion of the service, the presiding elder said, 'For many years we have been planting an orchard in Nashville, Tennessee,'" that's Meharry Medical College, "that has been bearing fruit. All of these years, I have not seen until the other day a single apple in this section from our orchard. If you were to spend money and time in growing an orchard, surely you would not be so silly as to say, 'I will not use the fruit from my own trees.' I have something to show you this morning that you have never seen before. A colored doctor, an apple from your own orchard. Isn't that wonderful? So then Perry goes on in his memoir, these were the words of the solemn minister in the way of introduction. To me, this was all a surprise, but I perchanced to have a bountiful supply of business cards, which were generously distributed as the crowd surged forth to shake my hand at the conclusion of the remarks. So he was prepared. He had his business cards. Not that a town like Mexico, Missouri would require too much. I mean, there are probably only a few streets in the town, but at least had his name on it and all. So any physician, black or white, would have had problems like this establishing oneself. But race made a difference in this case. Few people, white or black, had ever seen a black person with an MD degree in the 1880s, 90s, 1900, 1910. So another doctor, a graduate of Leonard, who was practicing in Maxton, North Carolina, wrote that blacks, quote, generally seem to appreciate their people, and yet the black doctor is such a strange man to a great many, they have to hesitate and look him up and down. Black physicians did occasionally meet open resistance from black patients. And this was confirmed by a couple of sociological studies. I forgot to put up this picture. This is Robert Fulton Boyd, the first president of what was became the National Medical Association, the black counterpart to the AMA. I'm a Harry graduate, and here he is as a youngish man in his office. So there were two that I was able to come across, two sociological studies that were done in the early 20th century, both by white guys who went out into one into central and central Tennessee, and another in Georgia. And they wrote about, as you can see, studied Negro physician with particular reference to certain Tennessee counties. What they discovered was that black patients were pretty clear that when they spoke to these two sociologists, that physicians should be white men. That was what they were used to, I guess you would say. So why that prejudice against black physicians? You would think that why not just accept, this is wonderful, we have people of our ethnicity, of our race, who are physicians now. But there are a couple of reasons that I can think of. One is the long tradition and experience, and maybe you could say brainwashing, of blacks having experienced only white physicians. During enslavement, only white physicians, no education for people of color, especially enslaved people. So there's this attitude that black people can't be physicians. Another reason may have had to do with home treatments and root work, superstitious kind of medicine. And so people were used to doing treatments themselves and were hesitant to turn to black physicians. And there were some poorly trained and self-proclaimed black physicians practicing in the South, and perhaps that rubbed off, that attitude, that these folks were not very well educated and didn't do a very good job, may have turned black patients, potential black patients, against black physicians. White physicians didn't encounter this sort of rejection because the basis was racial. White physicians may have been rejected because a person was a poor physician, but not because they were white. So here's a picture of Alonzo McLennan, who was a Charleston physician, published a journal for a couple of years called the Hospital Herald, and also founded a nurse training school. Okay, so now let's look at white physician reactions to black physicians. Some white physicians, openly or covertly, acted to keep black physicians down. For example, Dr. Perry again, he moved from Mexico, Missouri to Columbia, Missouri, bigger town. And before he opened his practice, he visited a few of the white physicians in Columbia to introduce himself. And one of those physicians said, "The practice among your people," meaning black people, "is done by white brethren in the profession, and it would be a mighty hard thing for a man of your age, and most especially your color, to wring it from their hands." That was in 1895. So why that strong attitude, negative attitude? The problem was a national one in part. There were, as I mentioned before, medical education was not well regulated. And so to become a physician did not take it was easy to become a physician, and there were many physicians. So most towns had at least one, if not two or three physicians, and so there was overcrowding. Too many physicians, too few patients. So to have additional competition from now black physicians caused the kind of response that Perry received from that doctor. Also, the 1890s, there was a depression following the panic of 1893, and so money was scarce. So it wasn't easy to, there was, again, this competition, let's say it that way. But most of the problem was race. And here's a quote from to that same white sociologist. White doctors in Tennessee could still say frankly to this white sociologist in 1920, "Mr. Martin, you will find that the Negro mind is incapable of any considerable development, and Dr. A, being a colored man, is not to be seriously regarded as a real physician. He is a good Negro, but still a Negro." White physicians in the South isolated black physicians both institutionally and personally in a number of ways. They refused to admit black physicians to the local medical societies or the state medical societies. Medical societies were important because they were a place where you met your fellow and sister physicians, got to know them, exchanged ideas with them, talked about difficult cases, how do you take care of situations like this, find out who would be willing to consult with you when you have a patient who needs an extra head to think through what's going on. When you don't have that opportunity, when you don't have the collegiality of knowing other physicians, that can make a big difference. And so it was a way of isolating black physicians. And this man, Alexander Augusta, who was born in Norfolk, practiced up in Canada for a little while, and then was a Civil War surgeon, and then a Freedmen's Bureau surgeon, and then finally a professor of anatomy at Howard. When he and a fellow black physician at Howard tried to join the medical society in Washington, D.C., they were refused admission because of race in the 1860s, early 1870s. Another way was to refuse black physicians admitting privileges to hospitals. Hospitals were just getting to be places where you went to get better, not to die. Germ theory had been introduced. The late 19th century was time of great ferment in world medicine. And so hospitals were a place to go to get better. And black physicians were refused admission. So they had to leave their patients at the door, so to speak. Didn't get the experience of taking care of patients all the way through to the course of the disease, and also lost income because they couldn't take care of their patients all the way through. And you lose a certain amount of respect when you can't see your patient through to health. White physicians would refuse to consult with black physicians. What a terrible thing. When a patient's life is at stake, and instead of helping, they say, no, I'm not going to consult with you and try and get this patient better. Kind of sad. But I have evidence of instances where white physicians refused. So black physicians could not do surgery in hospitals. They couldn't learn new ideas from colleagues. At medical societies, they lost income. But not all white physicians acted negatively. Some white physicians helped black physicians get started and continued to extend a collegial hand, would share knowledge, instruments, books. And remember that first quote from the Kentucky physician saying that he had a positive response. So here's Dr. J.W. Dupree telling Dr. T.A. Walker, black physician in Baton Rouge, "You are my colored medical brother, and I will go with you at any time." And then Robert Fulton Boyd, that guy I showed you the picture of, was the first president of the National Medical Association. He wrote, all the physicians he practiced in Nashville, and he said, all the physicians of the city treat me white, which is an interesting way of putting it. So what about white patients? How did white patients react to black physicians? Though most of the black physicians' clientele was African American, some white patients did choose black physicians over white physicians for several reasons. They liked the physician's work. They said, this is a good doctor, I'm going to continue to go to see this doctor. Also, black doctors charged less in general. Their clientele was poor, and so they couldn't charge the same fee level as white patients, as white doctors could to their patients. So sometimes white patients would go to see black doctors for that reason. And then I put here, they had special problems best cared for by black physicians. I won't go through a whole long thing, but if you use your imagination, you can guess that had to do with STDs, yes. And I have there's a book the fire in the Flint. Walter White was the executive secretary of the NAACP in the teens, 20s, 30s, and he wrote a book called Fire in the Flint. It's a novel, but it's based on factual experiences, and it's about a black doctor in a Georgia town. And he goes into a long discussion about how the upstanding white citizens, male, of the town would, when they had problems with sexually transmitted diseases, would go to the black doctor because they knew that the black doctor would not talk about the case. And if they did, they'd be in big trouble because it was clear who had revealed that secret. So that was another reason that black physicians had some white patients. So, with patronage from black and some white patients, many physicians in the New South reported material success to their teachers, to reporters in journals. And I've got a few pictures, and notice, I'll go back for a sec here, always posed with their rigs as well as their houses and families. And that was true of white folks as well, white doctors. There's Dr. Boyd again, Robert Fulton Boyd. And my favorite picture of physician in a horseless carriage. So, lastly, black physicians work together. So, black physicians gained success because, as I said, sometimes white physicians helped, but black physicians overcame racial attitudes of whites by practicing good medicine, by trying to build good relations like Dr. Perry did when he visited the white doctors in town first, by addressing specifically the obstacles that were put in their paths. They joined together with other local physicians to protect their interests. They would visit, take care of, if a black physician had to go out of town, a fellow physician would take care of that physician's patients. They established hospitals like the Dr. Perry again, the Perry Sanitarium. Black hospitals weren't always successful, but it was an attempt at righting that problem of not being able to admit patients. So you can see here, I love this invitation. Notice at the bottom there, ladies could come unaccompanied between 3 and 5, but in the evening, it was ladies and gentlemen who could come, who were expected to. And this is the Perry Sanitarium. Doesn't look like much, but it was important. It was a place for black physicians to go to take care of their own patients. This is Dr. McLennan's hospital in Charleston. There he is again. This is Dr. Matilda Evans in Columbia, South Carolina, at her hospital. And black physicians could earn some extra money. They owned their own drugstores. And here are a couple of pictures. Black physicians established surgical clinics where they could teach each other the latest ideas, the latest techniques, the latest information. There were annual affairs. Daniel Hale Williams, black physician from Chicago, then from Howard, ran a clinic every year at Tuskegee at John A. Andrew Hospital, and would train physicians in the latest techniques. And then medical societies. Black physicians established both local and state medical societies, and you can see the first couple were in DC and Texas, and then in 1887, the old North State Medical Society was established here in North Carolina and still exists. It's still going strong. And then in 1895, National Medical Association was founded in Atlanta. It's still in existence today. So parallel medical societies and medical journals, like the Medical and Surgical Observer, Miles Vanderhurst Link, Jackson, Tennessee physician, then moved to Memphis and started a journal for a couple of years. And the Hospital Herald that I have already pointed out to you in Charleston. And then in 1909, the Journal of the National Medical Association, the JNMA, which still publishes today, was established. So black physicians did okay in this time period and place, late 19th, early 20th centuries in the South, but they never escaped the race issue. One way of coping with the race issue was to establish parallel institutions, as I've pointed out, that got around the problem of exclusion from the white medical profession, but it didn't solve the problem. And they continued to fight for full entry into the medical profession. That's another whole story. Not until the civil rights era of the 50s and 60s did things change radically. And some would say that the problem still exists today and that racism is still there, maybe not quite as openly in the medical profession. So I'll stop here, and if people have questions, comments, thoughts, be happy to hear them and address them. Thanks very much.
Please raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over to y'all so that our people online can hear if y'all have any questions.
That was excellent. Thank you. Is this on?
It should be green.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And you may have addressed some of this, but were there, because kind of thinking about even, within the black medical profession, were there separate societies for black female physicians and dentists, or were the black female physicians also part of the societies that were established?
Because sexism existed in both the black and the white medical communities. Leonard Medical School only accepted men, did not accept women. Meharry took both men and women, but it varied. The medical societies, there are few records of black medical societies. There are no records that I know of the Old North State. Yes?
There are some records.
Going back.
Places, yes. And as far as I know, they all belong to the same society. And exactly what year, I probably got it in my records. I got it in my records somewhere, but I was president for 2 years. So, yeah.
That's not rheumatologist. Retired rheumatologist, but not quite retired from the med school. So I'm not sure, to be honest, how and when it would have happened. Women certainly were admitted, but I don't know when and how. There weren't that many women black women anyway in medicine. Other questions, comments?
You got some great history. I like the way you presented it, just what happened. And there are a lot of accounts. And even when I came to ECU, I was told when I was trained at Duke, don't worry about social issues and all these kinds of things. Just learn medicine. And how wrong were they? I was fortunate to, when I finished, to do a research project in Durham. I set up the first hypertension clinic there. I designed it with computers, and so I worked with community. I worked with sociologists, which was the best thing that could happen to me. There was a great sociologist there who was like nationally known. She kind of accepted me as her son. And I was at college at North Carolina A&T undergrad, a guy named Will Scott, who was one of the best known sociologists. And one of my good friends who, he started college the same time I did. He was 8 years older than me. His wife was teaching nursing, so he asked me to come with him to this lecture. And this guy was amazing, impactful. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I was a young kid from North Carolina off the farm. Didn't know my right hand from the left hand, but I went with him. I was always taught to be obedient. And so by going to his lectures, I began to understand people. And then later on, long story, my brother, he got out of the Army, he started going to sociology, and I told him, and he told my brother, don't look to graduate on time, you won't do that. I said, just go to his lectures. And he did. And so then he called him back, he said, you'll do well. But that's what I really learned. So when I came to ECU and started, and I was diagnosing all these vasculitides and all these things that patients had never heard of. And I told them, I said, just take this medicine, you do well. I just tell them on prescription. Then they came back 6 months later and said, Dr. Treadwell, they had not improved. I said, what's going on? And they said, I can't afford those medicines. And I said, wow, I never thought of that. I said, my patients won't be able to pay anything. So I met a young lady, and she was a secretary on the wards, third floor of the hospital, and we became good friends. She was secretary. Then she left and got a job down at the social service place there. And I said, I'm going to talk to Deborah and see if she has any ideas. And she told me, she said, oh, Dr. Treadwell, we can get help for your patients, And so I went to every person in the social service department, and they sat down and talked with me, were very kind to me, and just educated me on things that I'd never known. So when I came back, I said, so my patients came to me, and I started seeing whether they had insurance or not, or some did not. And I said, so I wrote a prescription to the social service department, and I said, this patient has this disease, this problem, please kindly consider them for assistance. Thank you very much. Not one time did they refuse me. And all my patients got help. And so all of them come to me, and I built such a great practice, and a lot of the other guys from out here were wondering, why I was doing so well. And matter of fact, when I was departmental meetings, our section head meetings, some of my colleagues said, well, your patients don't have no money. You can't have. I said, my patients, my payment schedule is just as good as yours. And they couldn't believe it to my chairman, Dr. Firth, I never forget him. And he was from New York, Cornell. He was a good guy. He was always encouraging to me and everything. And Dr. Porter's was too. And so he said, oh, Ed, numbers just as good as anybody else. And when the guys told about that, they did not like that. And so I set targets and I did this. And it's amazing. I tell all students going to college now, make sure you take English where you can write well, speak well, and take business courses. A business course or two, I don't care what your major is, and take sociology. Learn people. Learn how to get along with people. And my good buddy over there, he Dr. Now, this field as well. And that's what really, really changed things. You have to know people and get along with people. And it's amazing what they did. So I can tell you other stories too. You know, and I was fortunate to have a good physician in my hometown, Amos Johnson. Well, he went to Duke in the 40s. He's a Caucasian, and he went there. He loved the people too. So he came back home to Garland. Anybody heard of Garland, North Carolina? Clinton. Well, it's White Lake. You heard of White Lake? Well, you got to go right through it. You go into White Lake. You're not from nowhere from White Lake. That's where I grew up at. And of course, my great-great-grandfather came here in the 1700s and his brother. And they were out towards, they went to Wilmington, but somebody got hooked up out towards, what's the place you just mentioned, Dorothy Redford Sproul. You know, she did the history thing. You know, do you remember her, Todd? You went out there and helped her, I think, with the history. She got an honorary doctorate from ECU.
Doc Redford?
Redford Sproul. Dorothy Redford Sproul. Yeah, well, she's a cousin of mine. We found out. Yeah, so I'm the great-great-grandson of the first. My great-great-granddad came in the 1700s and his brother, and they got their freedom from a guy from Boston right when they got here because they took care of his wife. And so they moved there, and so there really were very few. They never were slaves between Wilmington, Fayetteville and Wilmington, where most free blacks lived before the Civil War. There were 30,000 that lived between Fayetteville and Wilmington. Most people don't know that. So it was great. But there was a lot of good stories, and I have another book, a couple of guys who practiced the medicine without being denied in medical school. I forget his name right now, I'm blocking on it, but he really became a very famous physician. And I got his book, but I'll think about it when I get home. We get it. But thank you very much. Okay. That was good. Yeah.
Have other questions? Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Unfortunately, there was a Project Nanny when I started medical school that we wanted to have so many African-American physicians by 1990. We got up to close to 13%. That was the target. But now we've gone back to 4%. Yeah, 4%. And I just wanted to get your view, what you think. And you were talking about what some of the white physicians said about black physicians. It seems like this is resurfacing again. And the question is, how can we deal with that? And not only just attitudes, but the way the whole medicine is structured, that there are very less and less few individual doctors, black or white now. All these big organizations are taking over medicine. And so it's very hard to find a primary care doc, and especially African American, that's going to be almost impossible. So what are your thoughts on that?
That could be a discussion of, I honestly don't have any wisdom about what to do or why it's happening. We like to think that our school is one of the stronger schools in terms of bringing people of color to, but it's,
I think
the world is changing right now.
The world is changing, and I've heard some very negative things from students that you wouldn't believe. And they said this is being orchestrated, they think, and not just African American, but other minorities, to keep them suppressed. And this is recent. Yeah. So just look at the numbers of graduates. You'll see that we are going way back, just like where we came from before.
Other questions?
Dr. Savitt, I work with you on a project called the Physician's Experience in Eastern North Carolina, 1996. We interviewed 4 African-American physicians. Dr. Andrew Bass here in Greenville, John Hannibal in Kinston, Joseph Weaver in Ahoskie, and Milton Quiglis in Tarboro. Okay. You were talking about the records that you saw at Leonard Medical School. Have you had any opportunity to look at the records of these 4 physicians? Are they there?
No, I have not. Leonard has some school records. That's the only place that I've come across. I have not seen Howard's records at all. They're just not available, or they weren't when I was doing this. And it'd be pretty recent to be able to look at the records of practicing docs. It'd be pretty sensitive to look at their high school, college, medical school records. That's what you're asking.
Yes, to some extent. And you're facing the same problem there with your research that we have faced as historians, especially when historians place heavy emphasis on written records. That's where we got a one-sided view of slavery, when we had to depend on the records left by slave holders and the masters and all of that, you know. So have you found a way to get around this to some extent, like the historians did in the study of slavery, you know? They started paying a little more attention to records maybe that were not in the archives, you know, like they paid more attention to the records left by enslaved folk themselves, the slave narratives and oral history and folklore, you know. And they moved us away from that more traditional approach that we would use as if it's not in the archives. You know, if I wanted to study churches, for example, in a community, I knew the churches existed. I could see them and all of that, but I would go into the archives. There are only records on maybe 1 or 2 white churches in that community. So if I depended on those records, then I wouldn't find anything on African Americans, you know. So how have you worked to get around that?
Well, fortunately, physicians are literate and write, and so Dr. Perry's memoir, and there are a number of other written kinds of records that you can get at that are really helpful. Newspaper articles. I mean, it's a different world from slavery times, when it was a silent group that you were trying to study. That's a good question. But. Okay, let me just see if the other folks have comments first, just to make sure. I don't want to.
I just want to ask this question. I guess you're talking about patient records they kept.
No.
You're talking about.
He's talking about physician records. He's talking about what I was talking about, not about the patients.
Okay. Because there was a gentleman, he's from New Jersey, he practiced in Pennsylvania. I'm blocking on his name right now, I apologize, but I have his book, who really wrote his whole account of his practice and where he started from and all that. And then there are others as well. So I'll talk to you about that. I'll look at my library, but there are definitely some around.
Anybody else? Y'all, please help yourself to refreshments. And I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Savitt.